Well, welcome back. In this video, we're looking at the second half of John chapter 14, verses 15 through 31. And again, this time, most of the letters are red here in my Bible because it's more words of Jesus as he's now continuing to speak to the 11 remaining disciples on that Thursday night before he's arrested and then tried and crucified the next day. And in this part of the conversation, he's talking about kind of two main ideas that intertwine through this passage. We'll look at those one at a time. And the first one, the main one, is the theme of the Holy Spirit. In the first part of this chapter, which we looked at in the last video, Jesus was comforting his disciples because they're becoming concerned with all of his talk about going away. And now he's continuing that sort of comforting conversation, and he's going further with it by explaining that another one is going to come who will basically replace the role that he has had in their lives. Verses 16 and 17 say, "And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to help you and be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you." And just in those two verses, we learn a lot about who this Spirit is. He'll be an advocate like Jesus, so he will plead the case of Christ's disciples before the Father. He will be a helper. He's called the Spirit of truth, so he'll bring them the truth. And whereas Jesus is going away, he will be with them forever. Unlike Jesus, he's invisible. The world doesn't see him or know him, but Jesus' disciples do know him even though they don't think they do. And the reason is that he lives with you and will be in you, Jesus says. And that is a reference to what Christians call the Trinity. The Bible teaches, and actually these latter chapters of John are one of the main places we see this, that God is one, and yet God exists eternally in three persons: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's a mystery we don't fully understand, but that is a reflection of the limits of our little brains. It's not a problem in God, it's a problem in us. And the reason that Jesus can say they already know the Spirit then is that it's his Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the Spirit of God. It's the Spirit of the Father. It's the Spirit of the Son. In the last video, we saw Jesus say that anyone who has seen him has seen the Father. And now we're seeing that anyone who knows him knows the Spirit. And that's why he can say in the next verse, "I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you." When the Spirit comes, it will be Jesus coming back to them. And then he goes on and says, "Before long, the world will not see me anymore, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live." So there you have a couple of things. You have a prediction of his resurrection, and you have the promise of a new kind of life for them because Jesus will share his resurrected life with those who believe in him by giving them his indwelling Spirit. So they will see Jesus because his Spirit, the Spirit of God, will come to them and amazingly won't just be with them anymore, but will be in them. And then you have this amazing, confusing statement of unity, and it won't be the last one in the book of John, I'm afraid. In verse 20, "On that day you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you." And I'm not going to go very far with explaining that right now because, as I've mentioned before, in chapter 17, we get a lot more statements like that. So we'll look at this whole idea of union with God when we get there. Well, if you go further down in the chapter, there's more talk about the Holy Spirit. He's again called the advocate in verse 15, or maybe it's 25, sorry. Jesus says he will teach the disciples all things and remind them of everything he's said. So he'll be a teacher. And he'll be instrumental in the writing of the scriptures because he will make sure that Jesus' words are remembered. And then verse 27 is a beautiful promise. Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." For those who trust Jesus, he promises peace. But then he clarifies and says it's not peace the way that the world gives peace, meaning it's not dependent on circumstances, it's internal. And given the context of the chapter, it seems clear that it's the Holy Spirit who is the source of that internal peace. And then I do want to mention this other theme that comes up in this chapter. In verse 15, Jesus says, "If you love me, keep my commands." And that statement there sort of seems to stand on its own, and it seems pretty straightforward. Love for Jesus is not just a warm feeling. It's expressed in obedience. But then that idea comes up again in verse 22 and following, when another disciple named Judas, not the betrayer, asks Jesus why he won't show himself to the whole world, but just to the disciples. And he doesn't really even understand what he's asking, because Jesus has been talking about showing himself after his resurrection, which they don't really understand yet. But the principle is the same. Jesus, if you want people to have faith in you, why not just make yourself unavoidable to them? Why not just do great big miracles in their face, and then they would believe? And Jesus answers that by repeating that earlier statement. If anyone loves me, they will obey my teaching. My Father will love them. We will come to them and make our home with them. Anyone who does not love me will not obey my teaching. Now, what's Jesus saying? What does one have to do with the other? Well, he's saying that people's response to his teaching predicts what their response would be to a miracle. Remember, when we see Jesus, we are seeing the Father, he said. If someone hears what Jesus has to say and isn't interested, the bottom line is they don't want God. And they probably wouldn't like it expressed that way, but that, Jesus says, is the reality. If you don't like what I have to say, you don't really want God. And when someone doesn't want God, no miracle is going to change that. Jesus is saying, my Father is pleased when someone responds to my teaching with faith and obedience. And then seeing miracles, meeting the resurrected Christ, is a privilege for those people who have faith. God chooses to make a home in the hearts of those who love his Son. That's what Jesus says. If you love me, that will lead you to obey me, and that will lead you to see more of me. Well, that's chapter 14. We'll look at chapter 15 in the next video.